let me kick off with a couple of questions to all of you and get a conversation going here. I teach courses in Native nation building. I get these really bright young Native students. We start talking about economic development. And, you know, they're young, they're awfully naive. And I want to ask you particularly about the question of this issue of maximizing profits, or in your case, Susan, maximizing rate of return. My students often just desperately want to hear that the kinds of enterprises that you all run don't manage for profitability. They want to hear that. They really do. And then I usually have someone like you come in and talk, and then they flip to the other side, and they think, well, it's just capitalism. That's all it is. It's just capitalism. And I say, wait a minute. If you listen to these stories, we don't demand of Apple or General Motors or Ford Motors or something like that, that money be plowed back into the community the way all of your different enterprises do. And so I tell my students, if you want to think it's capitalism, yeah, it is. You're out there in the market. But it's a new brand of capitalism where the returns are the shareholders. We all use the term shareholders. The shareholders are the people, and they own your profits. I'm setting this up because I'd like to hear you guys talk a little bit about where does that boundary of just pure, blind, maximized profit stop? In other words, are there places where in your day-to-day work you're making decisions where if you wanted to make an extra buck, you could, but you're making actual decisions not for profit, not purely for profit, but because you have other objectives as a result of being ultimately owned by your citizens, your tribal shareholders. Where's the boundary on that, or how do you look at this issue? I'm sure you've been asked this. You've probably been attacked. Your mother attacking you last was really, that's what she's saying, right? There he is out there maximizing profit like a good capitalist. What you call you an idiot. So I'd like to, any of you, if you'd like to say, how do you think about this question? What would you say to these kinds of remarks from my student?
I'll start. My mom was living in a town we built in a subsidized lot in a house that took the down payment assistance program and built the house at cost, and that I pretty much paid for. So she's a beneficiary of the capitalist system. She doesn't see it that way. It's when you were talking, several things popped in my head, but one of the things I want to tell you is that something that never leaves our mind. You know, we talk about on-reservation versus off-reservation, how we approach it from an economic standpoint. I'll get to that in a second. But off-reservation, we're not IBM. We're not profit maximizers. We're representatives of the Winnebago tribe in Nebraska, right? And so we do a couple different things that are weird. Like, I think we always spend too much on furniture and making our things look really cool because people think we're not. You know, they're always surprised when they come to our offices how good they look, right? And that's expensive, but we do that kind of for a reason. People want to think poorly of us. They're surprised how smart we are. They're surprised we're good at stuff. They're surprised at how nice our stuff is, right? And so there's that sort of element to it. But there's also, in business, there's people we deal with who are sort of evil, who are sneaky, who are liars. And that's just business, right? People they're motivated by that. But we are not sneaky. We're not evil, and we don't lie. Because if we do that, then it's not Ho Chunk Inc., it's not me, it's all Indians, right? It's the Winnebago tribe in Nebraska. And so if you were to come to our area, our reputation is rock solid. We have a rule, do what you say, always do what you say you're going to do, and be careful what you say you're going to do, right? I mean, that's because people are waiting for us to trip up. They're waiting for us to fail. When it comes to on-reservation, so we're not exactly profit maximizers off the reservation. We're trying to find that balance between representing the Winnebago people and making a lot of money. On the reservation, totally different story. We have a combination of mechanisms in place to help us do good things. We built 10 elder units, right? We got some money from the Harvard Award-winning Ho Chunk Community Development Fund to help supplement the cost of it. The tribe let us keep some of our dividend one year, and then we rented them out at like $300 or something. And they would be $1,000, $1,200 off reservation, right? And so, you know, it's a way to sort of just pay the bills there, cover the taxes, cover the insurance. But we're not trying to make money there. there's no return on capital that even comes into the equation there. It's like, you know, can we provide good housing? Now, from the tribal viewpoint, they're indirect beneficiaries of it. What we do is we give the tribe 20% of our profits. So they want us to make money. I had a conversation with our councilman today about, hey, your dividend's going to be a little more than you might think this year. We're doing well. I kind of, in Winnebago, you don't say that. You've got to be quiet about it because it'll be spent 4 or 5 times, right? But over. And but every time we do well, the tribe, they have a direct relationship with us. And not only is it about housing or jobs or profit, it's also direct money that goes into the tribal pool, and they are 100% focused on culture and community and social development. So our dividend started off with nothing for 5 years. Then I remember it was 10,000 and 30,000. It'll be somewhere around 2.6 million this year, right? And so it just keeps going up. And our tribal government is 100% focused entity on the tribe. And so by giving them capital, that's very helpful. It's a little bit different, I think, with AMCs because you don't quite have the tribal ownership in that perspective. But for us, there's a very direct linkage, and we live and work in the town, and so there's a lot of pressure to do that.
Anthony, I'll take a shot at this one as well. With the Sage Security, we do try on a day in and day out basis to run our businesses for profit, obviously, because that's our longevity, and that's how we're able to return a dividend to the tribe annually, and then the tribe decides how they want to use those funds within the entire tribal organization. So we place that burden back on them. In addition to that, we see ourselves as a good corporate citizen in that we make scholarship contributions over to the tribal college as well, and then we make a contribution for graduate students at the University of Montana. So that's how we have outreach. I was surprised when I received the book back the other day from the college. We have a diverse tribal background from throughout the United States that attends SKC. Of the 12 recipients that received money through this contribution we make to SKC, 10 of those were from other tribes. So in that way, the tribe itself is giving back through this dollars and cents that goes back into it. And those people, when you read about some of their backgrounds, you're quite taken aback about what a struggle it's been for them. But the very fact that they've been able to pull themselves up by their moccasins, back into school to make themselves a better life is really a prideful thing on our part. One I'll touch on ever so briefly is the tribe had an environmental services company under another sister company that was troubled, and the tribe itself had pledged collateral, certain assets to the bank with respect to that, and the tribe wanted to release those funds. So what we did is we actually bought the company from the tribe, transferred it over to us, and then we continued to operate for a number of years to clean up those contracts that they'd engaged in, which were not profitable. We could have easily declared bankruptcy in the particular company, sent it under, and defaulted under those various construction contracts. But we saw it through at a loss to us for about 3 years, substantial losses. What the tribe came away with, though, is a company, though, that still has an outstanding brand name and did great work, just at a loss. So that's sort of managing corporate-wise for profits on one hand, and the other one saying, they needed some help here, we'll step in and we'll fix it for them, and we'll take the loss ourselves internally in the corporation.
I'll give a kind of a recent example of a boundary the management team and the board has come up against. We started an entity called Ha-Ani. It again means one of our values, but it also is our land. And we started Ha-Ani to do economic development in Southeast Alaska. And the board did it again because our companies were in Miami, Guadalajara, Mexico, all over the place. There wasn't that focus in Southeast Alaska. They capitalized it with $5 million and gave it some natural resource assets and told it to go create economic development that is not there right now. Meaning you can't buy an existing company that's already operating and successful. You have to create the economic opportunity. And I even had a really good friend of mine that was being pushed into this role, and he was trying to backpedal. I don't want to take this on because it's a daunting task with our rural villages, population anywhere from 300 to 800, extremely high energy costs, no road system, so transportation in and out's a $300 flight anytime you want to go anywhere. One barge a month, any number of issues that our economic development entity have faced. And we've kind of hit a point where we know that we could throw 20 million at economic development. We could throw 50 million at economic development, and we wouldn't have the type of effect we wanted in our rural villages because of the significant issues they face. So we were approaching that boundary of realizing, how much money do we want to throw at this? One of the things that we looked at is that, we have so many projects that have I call it the feasibility gap. There's something missing. Why can't the business work in my hometown of Yakutat? There's just something. Is it energy? Is it logistics? If it's a single entity trying to close that feasibility gap, most cases that project's not going to get off the ground. But if you bring in 3 or 4 partners that have the same shared values, we work a lot with the Forest Service, the Nature Conservancy, the local municipalities, the local chambers, our sister village corporations, our sister tribes, and we are collaborating and pooling resources, so we don't have to throw significant large dollars. We can pool our resources and make more significant efforts and change through a collaborative approach than just throwing more money at it. And there is absolutely kind of that for-profit mentality within that decision, but we think over the long term that's going to make the most meaningful change for our region.
I just wanted to add one thing. It just takes a second. To give you a sense of mindset shift, Winnebago's the largest solar installation in Nebraska, which isn't saying much because we got some. We have like 500 solar panels around our town, and we got some grant money, and it was a good return on investment. And somebody said, but we built most of them at about a 3 to 4% return. And somebody said, well, how could you get your board to authorize that? And I said, well, it's an interesting conversation because we're talking about it's not a great return, but we wanted to put solar up because we thought culturally, it would give us some independence. Not what culturally, but it's almost economic and energy independence. When you said the energy cost, it came to mind. But I said, do you remember we had an explosion 20 years ago at a fertilizer plant? If you know anything about fertilizer plants, when they blow up, they go bad, right? And so there's a cloud of ammonia coming to the reservation, and everyone's been evacuated. And we're sitting in this meeting, and somebody said, did we get evacuated? I said, there's probably somebody at FEMA who said, I thought you called the Indians, all right? No, I thought you were going to call the Indians. So let's get the hell out of here. And you could see like animals running south, like in Bambi in a forest fire. But and so I brought this up in our board meeting, and I said, when the zombies come, we're gonna need. No one's coming for help, right? And so, but we'll have our own energy, and we'll be able to fight them off. And our board's like, yeah, that's a good point. So we spent this money and invested hundreds of thousands of dollars at a very low return in our community on solar panels because of zombies. And I just so you know how it goes on the chance of zombies.
I just lost track of my notes here. The question that would apply to us would be to maximize rate of return. Where does that rate of return stop? Are we trying to get the highest rate of return? We have to consider the funding objectives, and the Trust Committee has gotten very good at answering the stakeholders, which we do on a regular basis. We provide reports. I brought my semi-annual GTC book. Has a lot of information from all the divisions in the tribe. And so it's our job to make sure that we're complying with all of the General Tribal Council resolutions and the mandates. And as we've gotten pretty good with our job, we get more funding liabilities. So when that happens, we have to do a risk tolerance with the liability study and the asset allocation study before we go into that new area. But I do remember the Trust Committee a long time ago telling me we have to beat inflation. We have to be perpetual because that's what General Tribal Council said. So all those parameters come into play when we determine what kind of rate of return is appropriate for that risk tolerance. And this book does show our businesses and what is returned to the tribe. The tribe is, the tribal members are stakeholders and they don't like to see loss. They don't really understand it. And so we have a lot to answer to try to ensure that we're not realizing losses. So we structure the portfolio in the various portfolios in appropriate ways to get a good rate of return, which is institutionally appropriate across the industry without undue risk.
You talked about answering to your shareholders. Let me ask a general question about that, and specifically about your relationships with your respective political arms, the tribal councils. And Anthony, you have a little bit of a different situation, but you're talking about you still have to answer to the community. How do you manage that relationship? I'm actually chairman of the board of a small tribal corporation myself. I feel like I spend half my time educating tribal council, and there's turnover in council. And then you guys have some of the best jobs in the communities. And so you get attacked for that. You're nodding yes. We all know what happens. How do you manage both on a personal and an institutional level your relationship with the political affairs and the tribal councils and so forth? Because as Lance, you said, the tribal council quite rightly is focused on the tribe, not on businesses. That's their job, is to worry about the tribe as a community. How do you manage that situation? What comes to mind when I ask this question? What memories go to mind? What kind of strategies do you use?
It is different a bit for us, but it's the same. Any executive went and sat within an ANC, they'd feel exactly like sitting within a tribal organization. I don't think anybody's figured it out. You know, I know that we can do much better. In Southeast Alaska, we don't have the relationship we need with all our tribal entities, with all our village corps. There's a history there that can go back to you didn't hire my son, you fired my cousin, you know, whatever it is. And those memories are so long that Village Corp A doesn't talk to Village Corp B, and Village Corp C doesn't call See Alaska back when we go into their villages. So it's there. I think as a younger, more collaborative generation, I'm seeing kind of the younger generation moving into leadership roles, and they want to forget all about those past political, issues that have fostered ill will for whatever 40-year reason. And just the relationship you build with that younger cohort, I think is improving relationships, and is probably one of the best ways forward, at least for the ANC system.
Yeah, for a long time in our town, our tribe, but really it's a town, there would be an election every year. We have an election every year, 3 out of 9. And one of the primary issues was Ho-Chunk Inc. And it was not just Ho-Chunk Inc., it was like my name. My first name was that, and so it some of that went away, I thought, but it popped up again recently. We have done like remarkable, I wish I had pictures, right? I mean, you can't drop an international corporation with hundreds of millions of revenue into a rural town of 1,500 people and not change the way it looks, trust me, right? It's a total, and still people are mad, right? I joke sometimes that I could go wash their car every Saturday and you missed a spot, right? And that's the nature of it. Somebody called me up and said, there's a hole in my yard. We built this house, and the house was $29,000, 4-bedroom house, 2-car garage, everything. And they got some low income. They made $29,000, and I said, quit parking in your front yard then, right? It's just the nature of what you deal with, especially with the people who are used to sort of making a demand. And it's really interesting too, because the same people who are upset would never say a thing in Sioux City, the town, if somebody were to treat them badly. But there's this overreaction in our own environment. And so the problem with the council, and we deal with the council, we do these sort of orientations. We have 3 new council members, and we're having an orientation in a couple weeks for them. We try to teach them. But sometimes they come in already sort of like, I had one pretend to sleep, during the presentation, or turn their back on it. And so it's really driven by, preconceived notions. And so our approach isn't so much wooing the council members, and we give them all their information and do that. Our approach is changing the community. And if we can get the people in the community to be more supportive, then I think that's natural from the council. The people who are against us in our community, and we're like a 50-50 sort of bunch, right, are the ones who aren't educated generally, are the ones who don't have a job. And we have more jobs than people in our town, by a lot, right? So if you don't have a job, there's a certain commitment to that process. That's even admirable on the level. You could go 10 years without working in our town and survive, right? But if we can change that group to come around and not be so negative and be a part of the success that's happening, then that spills over to the council. And so we do all the things you're supposed to do to integrate with the council, meet with them, talk to them, but really it's about people in the community, and that's where our focus is. And some people just won't change. Interestingly, elders are generally supportive. Young people are generally supportive. It's middle-aged people, maybe, who sort of grew up in an environment where they have sort of an expectation that something's going to be just given to them. That really where you have the struggle. And a lot of those people haven't done the things to really benefit from what's going on in our community, and they probably never will. And so there's almost an element of bitterness to it, I think. But I think if we can keep treating the elders right and take care of the young people, that will just solve itself over time.
How do you answer that at the personal and institutional level? Like Lance was saying, there's a certain faction in the tribe. No matter how well we've done for the trust, we do have the antagonists. And when I have the opportunity, if I'm able to facilitate a meeting, I'm able to respond to the questions right away, which helps to head off the angry way that they take things personally. If you can answer them right then and there and accurately, then you're instilling more credibility for you and your area. But I usually start off when I do get a chance to respond. That's very hard when I'm not facilitating. Somebody else is, and I don't get the opportunity to respond right away. But when I do, sometimes I just start off with, that is not quite right. And I remind the tribe of the...
I'm like, what?
You would have a better strategy.
I remind the General Tribal Council of the General Tribal Council resolutions passed by them. Even though they go back to 1974, 77, 1980, I'm able to cite them, and I can tell them what's written in those resolutions. So that helps with credibility. That reminds them of what their parents and grandparents tried to instill for the tribe. It's very important to respond immediately. And when it gets further, I remind them that not only do you have this benefit or entitlement, but you also have a responsibility. And so that's how we address those types of questions. And when they say, we don't know what's in our holdings, we don't know what you're investing, I show them this book. I say, we report to you twice a year. It's in here. So if you need more information, please contact me. So that's how we try to head it off. And they still come, and they still argue, and they bring up 20 different issues in one breath. And so that's when, if I'm able to facilitate, I can calm them down. But a lot of times it's out of our control when you have another leader at the tribe who is letting them speak, and a lot of the audience, the other General Tribal Council members, are believing the misinformation that they're saying, and that's what makes it a huge challenge for us. But you got to give them some validity to what they're saying up to a point, and then get the accurate information out there as soon as possible.
Tom?
Just to touch on ours, the Tribal Council has really been good to us in the past couple of years, in that they have appointed better and better members to our corporate board, our 5-member board, and so some really bright people that are sitting on our board. And so what they've been for us is when we go before the Tribal Council, and they have some questions about certain activities, those board members are so well educated by us, and they've taken such an interest in the corporation, they really are able to explain adequately to the council what we're doing or what's challenging for us, and respond to their legitimate questions in that way. And then they look back to me if in fact there's a real technical question about operations or a particular contract that they may not be versed in, then I'll pick up that. But we really focus on the board handling that running interference for us, and they've done a really credible job for us. The other thing that we try to do pre-meeting, if in fact we hear through the grapevine that there are certain issues that are going to pop up at the annual meeting or at that general enterprise meeting, to talk to one or two members of the tribal council so that they're really well educated, so we have a champion in the room so that he or she can say, well, I really understand that issue, and they can sort of diffuse any sort of that hostility that may be boiling below the surface by misinformation or people wanting to believe something that really isn't true. So that helps us a lot in that process. That doesn't say that we don't get attacked periodically. We do. We just live with it.
Yeah. I've been in the CEO role for about 15 months, and I get people that come up to me and go, I think you're doing a really good job. I can't believe what they're saying about you on Facebook. So one of the things, I am not on Facebook.
And I'm not on Facebook.
but I mean, that speaks to what we all see, that you know, we have 20 years of survey data on our shareholder base. We have 60 to 70% favorable. We have about a 15 to 20% neutral. We have a 10-15% somewhat negative, and we have a 5% negative that never changes. Those 5% negative are very, very loud. And it just, you know, you have to, in our mind, we have to sort through that noise and realize, consistently remind, we have not wavered from the 60 to 70% favorable. It's just these loud voices, no matter what we do. And in me and my new role, I looked at Arctic Slope Regional Corporation is the most successful ANC. I think they approach $3 billion in revenue and about 150 to 200 million in net income. They have some of the loudest dissident voices, so it's not going to change.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we did back 20 years ago that was innovative at the time was we have a board structure that integrates tribal council members into it. We have 5. We have 2 council members on it. And I always recommend you do that. And Jonathan Taylor, one of our friends, was on a board, and he said, I'm so glad we have that. And he was sort of skeptical because he thought there should be more separation. But I think that what you need is, you talked about educating somebody. It's far better if you have an advocate who understands, who by sitting in the board, that is an equal to the other tribal council members who might be in that situation. Because when you're in our role, there's the council, and then there's Ho-Chunk, and I'm there. So when I go to a council meeting, I'm sort of in the hot seat. I'm not an equal. Somebody called me a hired hand one day. And so you're not in the same position to fight back if you think something's unfair, and you have to respect that authority in that position. And so having council members who are not just who we do a certain sort of education for all new council members, but having them totally informed, totally engaged at the board level, and able to make a reasoned argument when you're not there, because you don't have to worry about it when you're there. It's when you're not there that bad things are happening to you. You know, and so having somebody there diffuses a lot of drama. A friend of mine, or one of our CFO, is from another tribe, and he was on the board, and he said he spent half his time going to council meetings because somebody heard something, right? And you spend and every interaction tends to be negative, even when you're just disproving a negative. It's still controversial, and so you don't have many positive experiences, and pretty soon everyone's mad at the corporation for some vague reason that's hard to articulate.
One of the things I think I'm hearing from you, and I see it around Indian country, you all are aggressive about getting information out there. One of you were just, the easiest way to kill a rumor is with the proper information. And if you can do it in person, as you're saying, Susan, it's even better. Say a little bit about just the nuts and bolts of what you do. I know twice a year you have a report, you have various reports. What are you doing to get information out there? I'm finding these native corporations are much more open than your run-of-the-mill U.S. corporation, where it's harder than heck to talk to a CEO or anything else. just in nuts and bolts. What are you doing? How often do you report? How do you do it? And how do you reach either council members or citizens who don't know how to read a balance sheet? No fault of their own. Most people don't know how to read a balance sheet. You know, how do you communicate? How often do you do it? What are the techniques that you use?
Real quick, standard corporate messaging doesn't work. I mean, I don't know how many times we issue a press release and I've had a non-Indian say, hey, I read about that contract you got, good job. I've never had a tribal member read one of our standard press releases. I don't even read them anymore because I consider them like just, you know, somebody, I never actually know the quote that is in there anymore. But they don't work. We mailed out our annual reports, and I went down to the post office, and half of them were in the trash. It was flowed up, right? And everybody wants to know what's going on, but they don't read them. This year, our annual reports have like a flaming Blackhawk on it, right? And so it looks like the Hunger Games. We're thinking, if it looked cooler, maybe they wouldn't throw it away. That is not true.
They still throw it away.
And so you really... So I have marketing people, and we actually are the largest marketing company in the region, right? So one of our subsidiaries, but they don't understand. They think we got to keep putting, and we do the positive message. We give out the annual report. We do like a newsletter in town, employees. We do all the things you're supposed to do, but I don't think that really moves the needle for us, really. I write a column in the tribal paper that's part sort of joking, part corporate information, part sarcasm, and that's done more good to getting out information than anything we've ever done on a corporate level, because I can sort of weave in, you know, ideas or knowledge or what we're working on into the discussion. That's been far more effective. Or just talking to people. When you work in a tribal environment, you have to go out. It's very hard because you're busy, but you have to go out and talk to people. And it's very hard to do to be part of the community, because then people just learn to see you and trust you a little bit more. Ho-Chunk has gotten so complicated that when we go to our annual meetings with the tribe, to be honest, a lot of them don't quite understand what we're doing, right? And so building that trust and being able to communicate on a basis that they understand. Hey, we got this amount of revenue, things are going well, this is where we're doing bad, this is where we think things are opportunities. It's a very simplistic discussion, but it comes down to trust more than anything, you know, and you've got to build that up in the community and at the council level. And it's not going to be in a press release, that's for sure. And our annual reports, by the way, you can read them, and there's lots of good stuff, but you also can just look at them and flip through the pages. And while I was reviewing this year's one, I said, all our charts, we need to go like this, right? We have a couple doing this. And I said, can we change that one up or put something in there? Because we want it to look good, right? Because that's all people care about. You know, there's a surface level of inquiry that your average person is going to make. And you've got to be able to appeal to that in some way. But really, it comes down to building trust on almost like on a smaller level and being a part of the community and integrating yourself in. Because I can assure you, standard stuff doesn't work.
I mean, our board, the absolute most successful, our board calls presence. And it's that same exact concept. We have to be in the community with our shareholders. And if we don't go to a community for a couple of years, we hear about it, whether our performance is great or bad. We have the annual report issue as well. I mean, one of the issues is we have an annual report that comes out. It's based on 2014. We hold a meeting in June 2015. At that point in time, I'm already thinking of 16, 17, and I'm scratching, okay, what do I tell them about 2014? That was about 18 months ago in my mind. You know, as a management team, we're so far beyond that. So, you know, we've been doing smaller tactics, you know, a financial update in our quarterly newsletter, more e-news, more web posts, as much media as possible to try and catch them up a little bit. So it's just not a annual report. You look at the numbers and you come yell at us. We want them to kind of come along with our thinking, with our strategy, and feel comfortable that we're at least making the effort. And if they see us as making the effort and being transparent, we get a lot of goodwill just from that.
Oh, I was just commenting on Facebook. One of the members of our board who's running for tribal council, he said one of the worst things that's ever happened to us in Indian country is Facebook. He says on Facebook he sees reports that every member of the tribal council has a Cayman bank account. So You just go. He says, what do you believe? And the problem is, it's really hard for them to fight back on pushback. So I'm sure there's that kind of thing that goes on with respect to our corporations. One of the things that filters us and helps us out is that, as I referenced in my opening statement to all of you, we have a multiple number of enterprises. So we've been lucky in getting lost in the crowd a couple of times. This year, the big target was the acquisition of the hydroelectric dam. And so they were in the press the whole time. And so we were in a backwater on that one, so that was a positive for us. The year before that, we were on the hot seat. We were managing that environmental services company, trying to wrap up some contracts. And the tribe is in intense water negotiations for the water compact with the Montana legislature, and there's a lot of press and hostility going on in the non-union community vis-a-vis that particular scenario. And we were trying to finish a dam on the reservation that provided irrigation water. And so we were literally weekly before the council telling them how we were doing with each shovelful and making sure that it was going to get done on time. And anytime they heard a rumor that either the gate was not working or the concrete was melting or whatever it was, we were there. So there are situations where that comes up, and you just got to be there and talk to them and just be transparent and take the beating when the club is in their hands. So, as Lance said, we're not at that political level, and they don't see us that. They see us as, an employee. So
I think Facebook is a double-edged sword, but I have 2,000 and some friends, and I basically will friend you if you've got some sort of connection to an Indian somewhere, right? I mean, and so, and it's it's like preaching to the choir a little bit. But there's two things on my Facebook: pictures of my kids doing something, and something Ho Chunk Inc. is doing. A link to an article or something. I'm out there seeing really cool stuff. Last week I took a couple pictures of a few old buildings that were turning into condos in downtown Sioux City. And I just put them up there, right? And then you do that, and you can do that enough, and then people feel connected. And I think that, and then I get so many messages from people with crazy business ideas and things too. And then I respond. People are critical sometimes, and I respond. And I sometimes respond with information. Sometimes somebody said, well, how come we don't? I said, look around, man. And I said, to the town, because it looks so much different. They go, oh yeah, left, And so sometimes I'll push back. And I think that one of the biggest problems we had as a corporate entity is we were so big and isolated. I think things like the column and things like Facebook can make people feel more attached and humanizes it a little bit on a different level. And so if I come across something that I think is worthy of sharing, I just put up a little note and a picture and then just let it go forth and multiply. And so I think you can use social media in a positive way too. You've got to be prepared for I've had several strange things happen that are really horrible, right? You got to be prepared for some of that kind of thing. But I've learned to sort of embrace it, and it's been very helpful, I think.
Susan, in addition to your reports that you mentioned, how are you managing the communications with your public shareholders?
We have monthly meetings. The Trust Enrollment Committee comes together and to handle a dual focus in their mission statement, which is to sustain the tribal membership and protect our trust assets. So we meet monthly with the Trust Committee, and they're open meetings. And we have quarterly meetings with the Business Committee. Some of my Business Committee leadership is in the audience today. Dahasi and Jenny. Wave your hand, Jenny. We meet with them on a quarterly basis to talk about membership issues as well as the trust fund performance. We provide the semi-annual reports to the tribe through our booklets in January and July. We do have Facebook. We post our announcements there. We mail out, for the Miners Trust, every miner receives a quarterly statement showing the net asset value, the market value of their trust funds. We also include a fact sheet with the performance, because we have two portfolios, one for 0 to 14, which is more aggressively invested, and then the 15 plus group is more conservatively invested, because tribe does not like to see any kind of loss. So we have it structured to minimize potential volatility and realized losses. And as part of our membership responsibility, we have created a project called Sustain Oneida. We have diminishing population. In 10 years, the Oneida tribe's numbers will be decreasing because of our 1/4 blood criteria. for membership. That project, we know, requires tremendous dialogue, and it's going to take a long time to get a lot of input on this project because we have to redefine our criteria. So we hold brown bag lunches, which is we go to various areas within the tribe, and the faction that I mentioned before are always there, and they bring up trust fund information as well as the Sustain Oneida initiative. So we have to be ready to respond accurately. And we held a summit, which was a gathering of almost 125 people came. We have over 17,000 tribal members. The summit was to address and open up the dialogue, increase awareness of the population trends and the problem with the diminishing blood quantum. And that was in 2013. We are gearing up for Summit 2. We're expecting more people to come because we presented this initiative for information at General Tribal Council meetings. It's unfortunate. There's good and bad to this. General Tribal Council has been convening more and more often because of a lot of petitions that the tribal members are bringing forward. That's costing us, the tribe, a lot of money, and it's truly not sustainable to continue with this type of handling of their grievances through these petitions. But I brought that, so at General Tribal Council, when it's appropriate, we add Sustain Oneida to that agenda. And we just ask that we continue with some information, ask that General Tribal Council accept it as information because we're nowhere near time to make a decision. We need all the voices. So we're trying to validate everybody's input. We get some crazy ideas, but we validate it. We heard you. And that's very important for credibility for the Trust Committee.
Well, why don't we open up the questions? Open things up for questions from you. Do they need a mic? Or I guess Ian's got the mic. So if you have any questions, please.
Each of you, I know, operates under a board that's separate from your elected government. What is the linchpin that you have that connects the government to the corporate operation so that there's that clear understanding of how things are supposed to work?
I'll take that first shot. The Tribal Council, when they select a member for our 5-member board, specifically say you are the shareholders' representative. And so we're sending you there in our place. If we had the time as a member of the Tribal Council sit in that board and be the board, we would be there. So you carry our message to us, the operators of the businesses. And so that's the linchpin with respect to Salish and Kootenai.
It's definitely different for the ANCs because our board is an elected body from our shareholder base. You know, it does feed through to our subsidiary boards. So we do have, you know, our operating platforms have subsidiary boards, and the board gives, you know, that subsidiary set of directors kind of guidance on what they expect from that operation, and it's expected that they do the deep dives into the operational performance. They bring back the information, share it with the entire board, and now when we have a board meeting, it's, you know, it doesn't have to be 2 days because the committees in the subsidiary structures are doing the deep dive and then, you know, sharing the information up to the full board. But it is different. We don't have a board that's completely separate. You know, it's just there's different subsets. We had our very first joint, or one of the only joint meetings between the Sea-Alaska Board and our Tlingit and Haida Executive Committee. And, you know, that's a different relationship. You know, that's one that we want to build just because we think it can be positive to build a better relationship in that regard. And we think there's a lot of avenues where we can improve relationships.
I think in our world, the tribe is the shareholder. We have 9 council members, so we have 9 shares to Ho-Chunk Inc. And each tribal council member votes those shares as a, you know, representing. So it functions just like a tribal council normal vote, but they're technically the shareholder. And so everything that requires shareholder vote goes to the tribal council. Their big responsibilities are annual. We have to give them a plan every year that they approve, and then we have to give them audits and an annual report those other sort of the checks and balances in place. They also are free to allocate capital. They have not done that since 1997, but it'd be nice. I was going to see our council member over there. I think they're expecting us to give them money nowadays, but there's definitely a systemic sort of structural approach, and everybody's roles and responsibilities are laid out and the council could pretty much do what they want, to be honest. But since we've had this tradition and laid out these roles and responsibilities, and everyone's sort of educated on the system, people sort of have to self-police, I think, but they do it, right? Everyone sticks to their roles because it's working. But that doesn't mean but it's a very tenuous thing, I think, and it really is dependent upon good leadership.
In our case, the Oneida Trust Enrollment Committee is elected from General Tribal Council. So the Trust Enrollment Committee members, as well as the staff, are stakeholders because they are General Tribal Council. We have to comply with the tribe's comprehensive policy for boards, committees, commissions, the information policies, and we also comply with open records and meeting law. So, and like I said before, I have to remind people sometimes that the autonomous authority that was granted to the Trust Committee was due to mistrust of the federal government, and they wanted to make sure the tribal government didn't access the trust funds so readily. So I remind them of those resolutions, which are law for us.
Regarding education, workforce development, human capital development, can you comment on how or what strategies you have in place as the rising cost of education is outpacing, the salaries, and how also, the education is not responding to industry needs, and one other thing is just the soft skills seem to be missing from a lot of the younger generations, as industry has kind of called attention to, and no one is teaching to soft skills. So just in those areas of education and workforce development.
I'll go first, I guess. We have a problem. We have 3 levels: executive, superstars, we got them, right? We got lots of hourly workers too on the hourly level. It's the middle management where we're struggling to fill the gaps. And the skill I complain about is writing, to be honest, the most. I mean, everybody writes in sort of LOL and things like that. But and I don't even think it's English sometimes, the stuff I read. But and so I've been pushing the writing skills. But what we're really missing, to be honest, are hardcore accountants. Anything with a CPA is worth their weight in gold. They could just name a job, right? We're missing management project people. We're missing hardcore technical management skills. What we have is something called sliders. And we just made up the term because what's happening is they're generalists. They're intelligent, but they're sliding up the sides of our company. And because they're tribal members, we're putting them in charge. But I'm very nervous about somebody who's risen to a certain level but doesn't have the technical skill set of the people beneath them, and they're not going to understand or they won't be respected. And so we're doing all we can to drive people into that hardcore middle and then have them pop out on top after they've proven themselves. But to be honest, we have more sliders than hardcore technical people, and it makes us very, very nervous. Our system that we have is long-term. We've been funding internships and scholarships for a very long time, and our goal is to pop out 1 or 2 middle managers a year, and every once in a while a star. And we've populated our ranks with 20-some of these young people, and they're doing a pretty good job. But we have 1,400 employees, so we're still not changing much, to be honest, although we're making more of an impact in our community as we're growing faster than we're creating more jobs than we can find people to fill them in our communities. It's very, very difficult.
Historically, we've had relied on scholarship program and an intern program and just this general want to build capacity within our shareholders. If you're in our system, we're going to put the effort behind you. But recently we need much more than that. We've kind of realized that let's look out to the partners that are asking themselves the same question, like the tribe. What are the VocaTech resources they have? What are the workforce development training dollars they have, and can we match up our industry focus with their resource dollars? Can we match up our scholarship funding with some of the areas that we need desperately, like Lance said, accounting. We need desperately accounting, finance, engineering, many of these areas that we need a lot of effort, and it's got to be, there's got to be a long-term focus to it, or else you'll never really address the issue if you're not starting and working with other people to put forth long-term programs.
Hiring talent doesn't matter. They won't stay if they're there for money. They're hired guns, right? But people who are going to take the kind of abuse that I take on a regular basis, they got to love that town, right? And so you've got to build up your own, because they'll care more, they'll work harder, and they'll stay. And so investing resources in people who are just doing it as a job, we have lots of people that do that, and they're great employees generally, but it's not the long-term way to sustain what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I echo the same. I mean, there's nothing to add to. We have the same issues. Sage scrutiny.
Are you able to work with SKC?
We do. We, like I said, we do the scholarships, and we do the university postgraduate scholarships, trying to get people there to sort of, to invigorate them to think, come and work for us. We're a great company to work for. But there's no way you can mandate that, and so we don't mandate that. But and we're constantly talking to the college about who you got coming through the systems. We've had some interns who've come through that now work for us in our IT arena as well. So we've had some success there. The other one is that if in fact we've got some, as Lance mentioned, possible stars that are within our organization now that could be really good managers, is getting them to move away and go to our sites, to go to Bremerton, to go to Georgia, to go to Grand Junction, to go to Houston, because that's where they can really sort of climb up and then and take hold of all those management skills, and then come back and maybe run corporation. Us boomers are just barely hanging on by the skin of our teeth. So it's time for that new generation to come in. But our reservation is so attractive, and I'm not overemphasizing, hard to get the folks to move away. They love it there.
Lance, you mentioned trust was a.
One second.
Sorry.
Was I? No.
I hope so.
The education, as far as the Trust Enrollment Committee scope, we do forward funding to the Oneida Higher Education Department Trust Scholarship Fund, and we try to fill a gap because there's also a GTC resolution for higher education funding. So we're providing a lot of resources and opportunities for the students to get to school and to remain in school. And in our policy, we do ask that the person receiving the funding considers returning something back to the tribe because we've helped them. Also, we have another area in the tribe who takes care of these issues. Workforce development is HRD. What we do know is that our personnel base, 3,000 people, 3,000 employees, it's very, very hard to sustain, and it's causing a lot of constraints on our budget. So it's difficult to find the balance there, but that is pretty much outside of the scope of the Oneida Trust Enrollment Committee. But the committee did make sure that all staff are Oneida. They want to make sure that our stakeholders are taking care of the funds for the stakeholders.
Sorry. Hi, Lance. You mentioned that trust was a critical element in the relationship between tribal councils and your various boards. And we know relationships get tested when things aren't going well. Do you have any experiences or insights about how your boards and councils handled situations where you're having a lot of problems and maybe potentially that trust was put into high focus and maybe came into question?
I would be selling that if I knew how to do that. We were joking. Ian asked, he saw a presentation I gave years ago where I had a fire meter on. There's 9 council members, and it would be only 2 wanted me to fire me this year, and that one year it was like 4.5. And I don't know what it is now, a couple maybe, but people don't want to fire me so much as just tell me what to do. But it's a weird thing. When we had a knockdown, drag-out political battle, Ho Chunk Inc.'s revenue stream goes like this. And the only time this happened is when we were fighting. We sort of stalled out at like 100 million. I was like, what are we really complaining about, right? But it's just the nature of it, right? And as soon as that ended, We took off. And here's what's weird about that, is we've always been sort of, we're in the community, so there's a political element to it, but we fought a political battle, strangely, because the government had the power levers. They just didn't think they had the political will to sort of do it against us. And so we fought a political battle that came down to really just one vote, 181 to 180, right? And then things took off and stabilized. And during that next year, I didn't have a single meeting with our tribal council. They wouldn't meet with us. They didn't want to. And we have all these required meetings, and we just didn't do it, right? And then there was another election, and the changeover happened, and then everything sort of stabilized, and we went forward. But once we became a political force, they didn't quite know what to do with us, right? Because half the people in town work for us, right? And so that makes you dangerous from a political standpoint and problematic. And so I told our tribal chairman at the time, if I never go down to a council meeting again in a political way, I'll be thrilled, right? And we just had political turmoil in our tribe again. And I tried to go the entire summer without showing up. They called me in September and raised the taxes on me, I think. But I tried to avoid the whole thing. Because I think if you become political, you become dangerous, right? And I realize we're in that environment, but I choose to try to ignore that and try to stay positive and stay focused on the growth and development, because if you're going to live by that sword, you're going to die by it. And so I think occasionally you have to be political in order to do what you need to accomplish. But if you just keep growing and doing good deeds, I think it should sort of play itself out, and you got to trust in people. So they need to trust in me, and then I have to correspondingly have to trust in them, in the system. And it's a combination of push, pull, educate, complain, but there is no magic formula to it, though.
The rest of you, I'm sure, have gone through business cycles, the financial markets up and down, the defense contracting and so forth. How have you weathered, were there storms, and how did you weather them?
I'm going to do a specific example, and it's Lance's political talk as well, is that when I first assumed control of the company in 2007, we had a new council that had just come in, and they were now implementing that. Remember I talked about that enterprise guideline resolution? Well, there was some language in there about where they would take all of the money, our net profits of the various enterprises, and then reallocate it back out for operating capital for the following year. And we just said we can't live that way. Why even have a board? You've assumed board direction now. You're going to tell us how much money you're going to give back to us for operations, how much you're going to keep for your own internal redistribution to your various programs that you have. And we really had a political dogfight over that. And I was, really going to go to the wall on that one. I thought they were going to destroy their enterprises had they adopted that particular principle. And the other enterprise presidents also stepped up. So that was a challenging time for us. And luckily, or fortunately, or whatever it is, the council decided that wasn't the approach that they should take, that they were actually going to harm their enterprises and enterprises that were growing and thriving at that particular time as well. So every now and then, I think you're going to get those big bumps in the road. And if you believe strong enough as a manager of these enterprises that it's going to harm the overall longevity of those particular businesses, you need to step up.
I've called it over the last year, noise in the system. There's cross currents. I took my first 12 months and we were given a very specific and built this strategic plan. And we knew exactly what we had to do. There was so much work, we just called it our head down time period. And we ignored kind of all the incomings that were trying to create the cross current. The ignoring doesn't work. It got to the point where, okay, step back, catch everybody up with what we're doing, make sure that they understand you put us on this strategic direction. Just like Lance said, if you keep those cross currents, in the system, the noise in the system, we're not going to make the headway like if we were all together working towards that singular strategic plan. So it is leadership. It is, you can't ignore it. You have to provide more information. You have to backfill information constantly, and use any method you can to get the alignment necessary.
Trust is very hard to get and very easy to lose.
storms?
The recession was a huge storm for us, being fiduciaries over the trust funds. Luckily, we're long-term investors, and we didn't realize much loss like Mainstream did, except the leadership at the time had extended enrollment. They went outside of our policies to allow more people to join the rolls because of a large per capita payment. It's a very sad story, but there were realized losses because some youth joined the miners' trust last minute, and the policies that were in place in time paid them out the next year. So we had, let's see, it wasn't as bad as it sounds, but like I said, the stakeholders don't like to hear any kind of loss at all. So at General Tribal Council, we had a lot of questions were thrown at us. To be honest, my legs were shaking as I was up on the stage. There was 2,000 people, tribal members there, because they, a tribal member petitioned for another large per capita, something like to teach somebody a lesson, I don't know. But it went so far as to go to General Tribal Council, and by the time the vote came for that second large per capita, there was enough information and dialogue and hours put into that meeting that General Tribal Council gave a resounding no to that large per capita, because they understood the recession didn't just impact Oneida.
Yeah.
They knew it was worldwide. They understood that. So they didn't want any other potential damage to come to the tribal funds or the trust funds with that additional large per capita.
Hi, my name is Greg Bloomstrom. I'm a forester from Northern California. And one of the business opportunities that my company promotes are forest carbon projects. And we've done a project with 2 different tribes and are working with a tribe in New Mexico to do a project there. And in my mind, these projects meet a lot of the metrics that you all have enumerated as being things that your businesses look at in terms of business opportunities. They're, in my mind anyway, pro-environment. They can generate significant revenue. They promote ecosystem services, but they're controversial. And so I guess the question I have for any one of you, and I think probably, you know, Tom and Anthony from large forest-owning businesses, maybe it's more appropriate for you all to answer this, but I know all 4 of you have reservations that have timber on them. I guess I wonder if what your view is about forest carbon projects and whether you'd see that as a business opportunity that would meet some of the goals of each of your businesses.
We're actively pursuing one right now. It is a tough decision because we could have a situation where harvested forest provides the same financial benefit as locking up a forest, and you could look at it as kind of a balancing act, but we don't look at it that way, because the active harvest also provides 200 jobs into our rural regions. So it has to be more than equal financial. So we look at it very in depth. It gets very technical, and if we can put a carbon project together that doesn't hurt an already declining industry, then we'll look at it, and we are actively pursuing one.
With respect to Sage Kootenai, the timber market has really been soft for the past 15 years for us. The number of, there's the sawmills have closed everywhere. When I was growing up, there probably were 6 sawmills on a reservation. There's not a single one now. The last one was closed 3 years ago. And then there's one over by St. Regis, a large one called Tricon, just shut down as well. So the market is just not there. I remember when, and it's handled separately from us. It's really handled as a quasi-governmental program by the Tribal Council through their forest products program, not a business. And so that's how that was set, and how they decided what forest is part of the forest to harvest at any given point in time. But it's really been extremely low in the last several years.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Heather Dawn Thompson. I'm an attorney. I live in South Dakota and work primarily with tribes who don't yet have their tribal corporations. So I don't know if I'm inspired or depressed to hear that the problems still persist even after you get over this initial hurdle. But we are trying to create the separation between government, politics, and economic development still in the Great Plains and in the Rocky Mountain regions where I mostly work. And there's only a handful of tribes that do have that separation right now. So my question really actually has to do with intertribal corporations to make life even more difficult. Because our tribes don't have a lot of capital and because they do share a lot of history. For example, all 9 tribes in South Dakota are from the Great Sioux Nation, and so we actually share treaty lands. We are moving in some aspects towards intertribal corporations. So for example, right now, I'm also in-house for United Tribes College. We just created an intertribal Section 17 for all 5 tribes in North Dakota. And so my question is, I think probably for Joe, in your experience in looking at this in Indian country, and maybe for Anthony, because you do have a lot of tribes within your region, do you have any experience in working between multiple tribes in the corporate world? And do you sort of have any advice to us as we sort of go down this path?
Yeah, the Alaska Native Corps do have that experience. ANCSA has a provision called 7I where we share all of our natural resource wealth. So we've harvested timber for 40 years. We've shared $330 million with the other regional corps, and the corp that has the oil wealth shares with the total system. So just that sharing alone keeps us together, and we've done telecom deals together. We actively search for business opportunities. We as we build the seafood industry, we would look to tribes and to the village corps and other ANCs to partner with. And in fact, being part of NFOA and being interested in building tribal relations outside of Alaska, we've talked about private equity partnerships with other tribes as well. Pooling capital. So even though we have about $100 million to put to work over the next 3 or 4 years, it may seem like a lot. In the scale of private equity, it's not that much at all. So can we work with other tribal entities that have that sort of scale, pool resources, and create something more significant?
We have trouble. The idea of setting up a partnership is with another tribe is difficult. We work with tribal corporations quite a bit. We work with the neighboring tribes, all of them. We do various things with them on a corporate-to-corporate basis. When it's corporate to tribe, it's not as nearly as successful because they're the tribal government. When you're a corporate entity and they're a governmental entity, they're not thinking on the same exact level as you, so it's very hard to do. I've seen some tribal corporations there's a cigarette factory in Washington that the other tribes took a small piece of for a regulatory advantage, and they've done well. We've talked about doing something like that ourselves. So I think there's opportunity. And there's more and more of that coming down the pike. But I have a hard time thinking how an entity with like 5 tribes, each owning 20%, I can see that fighting over, allocation of resources pretty quickly evolving. And there's been some trouble coming up with that. We do one-off individual investments with other tribes. We do transactions with other tribes. But it's all very easy to take apart just in case.
And we've bid on federal contracts with other tribal corporations where we're the primary or the secondary or vice versa.
We've been partners.
Yep,
yeah,
we
we're
have.
Partners.
Yeah. That's easy to do. I think it's the governmental one that's the difficult.
Yeah, we're joint owners of the Native American Bank. You too. So it can happen.
And I would say, Heather, that it may be that the way tribes work with tribes, tribal corporations work with tribal corporations, is not so much direct tribe to corporation, but through vehicles like the Native American Bank. Because when you think about it, that is a way by which tribes with some capital are investing and potentially then in a position to provide capital to maybe a tribe that doesn't have capital but has other natural resources or a workforce or whatever. So more and more, I think you see more and more tribes with their own small banks, and there are obviously intentions of the Native American Bank to be more national about it. You see the Chickasaw Nation's new community development entity doing what they call the new tax I just drew a blank on the New Market tax
I'm trying to
credits
get some of those
and so
right now
forth.
from them.
Yeah. And maybe that's probably how it's going to actually happen in a more sustainable way because of the difficulties that arise when it's tribal political side trying to partner with another tribe's corporate entity. These banks and other financial mechanisms provide a way by which tribes are actually helping tribes in partnering, and they're doing it through the capital markets.
The level of sophistication from now to 10 years ago is night and day, and from 20 years ago, it's ridiculous. It's not even. And so, as tribes get more sophisticated across the board, it is this opportunity part of it is booming.
Now, Susan and I were just whispering to each other. One of the success stories, I think, is though this case at the hotel in D.C. You might want to say something about that. Yeah.
The Four Fires business venture was approved by Oneida in 2002, and it's approved the investment for the formation and funding of the LLC. It's represented by the Oneida, Potawatomi, Viejas, and San Manuel. The tribes are 46% of the investment and the other 53+% is split between outside investors. The LLC was established to take part in the developing, constructing, and operating of a Marriott Residence Inn located in Washington, D.C. The hotel opened in 2005. It was estimated it would take approximately 7 years to see our return on investment. The tribe has already received this return. The return to the tribe for FY14 was $1.6 million. Part of that was resulted from Four Fires refinancing debt on the property. Also, on a much smaller scale is where the Oneida Trust Committee has invested in the Lakota Loan Fund, a micro-enterprise fund for the Lakota to distribute small business loans. And we've just renewed our third-year term with the Oglala Lakota for that fund.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Sherry Rupert, and I'm the president of the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. And we believe tourism is a way to diversify our tribal economies and to perpetuate our culture. So I'm interested in how you see the connection between tourism development and culture.
We have a love-hate relationship with tourism at Flathead. Obviously, we built a resort hotel and a marina and those kinds of things to attract and keep the tourists there. We know they pass through anyway. They're coming on the way up to Glacier Park, and they're going up to Waterton Lake. So we said, all right, let's put up some roadblocks along the way. But what the tribe did to balance that out is we have certain areas on our reservation that are designated tribal only, and so that the non-member or tourists. I like to use the term visitor. Tourist sounds always, it has a loaded word, but if you say visitor, it sounds more benign. We built the kinds of resources where we want them to be and have them, to use those lands. But there are certain lands that are sacrosanct for the tribes. In addition, the tribes have made the decision that while they'll allow hunters to come in and hunt upland game birds in the fall, big game hunting is strictly reserved for tribal members only.
Yeah, we absolutely think tourism could be a larger part of the solution for our rural economies, and in fact, one of our rural villages have gone all in, and I believe they have about 100 cruise ship stops a year now. Other communities don't want that, so it's not going to be for everybody. So you have to go in and ask, what do you want? Do you want to have 100 big cruise ships, or do you want 20 small cruise ships? Do you want an eco traveler? What kind of assets do you have? What's the land base? Who would be part of this? But in the instances where it's used, I think it's positive on the cultural, let alone the jobs, the fact that visitors spend money and they want real, tangible native goods, native arts. So it perpetuates, our traditional arts, and that's always a positive.
In our environment, Nebraska doesn't have a lot of trees, but if the place where they do have trees is our reservation and the neighboring Omaha Tribe Reservation. It's probably the largest natural forested area, and it's not that big. But hunting, is a huge issue there. I mean, people pay all these money to come hunt, but I mean, I just go drive around and hit a deer, if you're just not careful. But they don't know that. right? And so they raise maybe $500,000 a year from that area. I'd suggested in a memo I wrote to the tribe that I should have never written now, suggesting that, you know, we formed all these corporate entities and they've all gone forward. I said maybe our Wildlife and Parks Department could form its own entity and they could use their money to build cabins and tourist amenities and all these kinds of things, you know, basically giving them more control and power over their income stream. And all I heard was I was trying to take over the wildlife and parks or something like that. Like that's the last thing I wanted to do, right? But I think there's opportunity there, but it needs to be really a focus thing. And for Ho Chunk Inc., from our standpoint, it's so small. It would be, you know, less than 0.5% of 1%, you know, of what we do to take that on, and it's really not worth it. But if we could find, and I wouldn't know how to do it, but if there's guys who do, right? If we could get that focused, we could turn that into a real big thing, we think, on our reservation.
On a related question, you guys, I work at quite a lot for White Mountain Apache, work some of it's tourism related. You all have commented, a number of you commented about whatever line of business you're in, whether it's electronics or whatever. You are an important face for your communities. That's, as Lance said, people want to see you fail. They're surprised you get good furniture in your office. This kind of thing. You mentioned the sport integrity and your values. Tourism is one of those sectors where you are face to face with the public, and the needs for the human capital, training, and so forth, seem to be critical. And because you're going to create an impression for visitors, and if they're going to think of that's what they're going to think of that, or that's what they're going to think of as okay. Comment on the way you see the developments in tourism. Is it dangerous to tribes when they see some tribes jump in too soon? Maybe where there are people aren't trained. Any thoughts? It seems like some people think it's easy money, and it turns out it can really be hard on the tribe's reputation.
Yes, Sage Kootenays had Quatucknick now operating since 1992. I was instrumental in having that pulled together when I was at home the last time. We were successful right out the door. We brought in someone who knew the business. We didn't know how to run a hotel or a resort project, so we hired a fellow that had done startup businesses for other hotels, chains, as well as come in and handled hotels that were failing and had to turn them around. So we went where the expertise was. And he was really, really instrumental in making sure the staff was trained and that everything was good right out the door. So that's critical, getting senior management, good management in the right way to train your staff. And then once you get into sort of a groove, and then I thought we got lazy for a while and started to let the rooms go in. And the public is really fickle. You've stayed in hotels, food's not good, bed's not clean, you know, sink's dirty, whatever it is. You remember, and you tell one, and they tell one, and they tell one, and before long, nobody wants to stay in your hotel. So we went through that sort of phase, and then everybody finally turned around and said, let's get sharp again. And so they redid the rooms, redid the hotel, and they just put in a brand new facade out front, which has really been successful this past summer. So you got to constantly step up, and you can't let it drift. And those of us who, like all of you sitting in this room, you know where you want to go to a hotel. You know what you want. And so you have to be able to drive that point home to those people who are running that operation for you. So, yeah.
I'll just speak to just the upside or the positive aspect of the training and having young tribal members or shareholders present their community, present their culture. You know, the first time they're sitting there shaking and they've never talked to anybody. You know, the 100th time, the confidence and the skills that they've gained. You know, I just was up at the Alaska Native Heritage Center, and there was a young guy from a very small rural village, Chivak, I believe, and he just owned the stage. I mean, the whole audience loved him. I went up after and I said, I can't believe how good you are, how confident you are. He's like, you should have seen me the first time. You know? So it's a great training ground.
Yeah. I think you don't have to be afraid to, if there's an opportunity, do it, right? You might screw up. I mean, you might be terrible at it. We're terrible farmers right now. We're farming, right? But we're gonna. But I told somebody we figured out. We invented corn. We'll be all right, right? But you have to look at it as a process. You know, I used to, when I was younger, because I used to be a lot younger, I used to get mad about everything that didn't go right. It's like, you know, we got to do this, and it wasn't fast enough for me. Now that I'm not that old, but I'm a lot wiser because I've been CEO for 21 years. I think, all right, let's just not do that again. All right, what can we do the next time to make it better? You know, to me, I look at things now with tribal situations and tribal people as a process, and it's sort of a continual sort of improvement process. And odds are you're going to do something screwed up in the beginning, right? And then the next year a little bit better, and pretty soon you don't even remember how bad you were, or it's a funny story, right? And that's just the way it is. There's somebody who was so afraid to speak, and now I can't get the mic from her, right? Somebody works for us, you know, and so it's just the way it is now.
We have time for, I think, one more question.
One more question. I'm Brian Ridley. I'm the finance officer for Tanana Chiefs Conference in Alaska. And my question, I think you guys touched on this some, but specifically for each of you, what is your native hire rate, and how have you balanced that between trying to hire your own people and make a profit, that balancing act?
But it's relatively easy for me at our corporate office because I'm able to attract tribal members from Salish Kootenai and from other reservations. And I have probably half my workforce is Salish Kootenai and half are tribal members from other reservations in and around Montana or Idaho. Where I have a hard time is attacking tribal members to go to work in my limited liability companies, as I mentioned, throughout the United States. I really have a challenge there.
There's absolutely different. At our corporate offices, we hit 50 to 80% shareholder hire. You know, in the field within our natural resources, we're anywhere from 33 to 50. It kind of varies. Right now, we're on the lower end because it's kind of an aging industry. We need workforce development there to improve the career paths that we can identify for our shareholders. And again, in the operating businesses, I think the highest we've gotten is 20 in the Seattle area, 20%, which we think is very good, and that we'll aim to hit that for more of our subsidiaries. But if we're not where our shareholders are, it's going to be zero. So in Miami, we had zero.
No, that's a big problem. You know, on reservation, it's totally different than off reservation. You know, I mean, if we got a tribal member in the area, great, but the percentages are almost zero to very, very low. It just if as you expand beyond that environment, it's very tough. Where we're challenged is we're growing so fast that our skill sets of our people aren't necessarily growing with us. So we've got to get very creative. And I actually got mad at some of my staff last week, higher end staff, and I said we better start coming up with rationales and logical reasons to hire this person to give them a chance, instead of coming up with the reasons why they're not qualified. In our company, everybody's the same. Nobody. I was 26. Nobody should have put me in charge of a company then. I mean, I'm looking like, oh my gosh, right? I was just the only one we had, right? I went to Harvard, so they thought I knew something, right? But I did not, right? But and everybody took a leap in our company. Where we've been successful over and over again is identifying talent and giving them a leap, and then going through that learning process. And so that's what I had to have a reminder conversation in a friendly but forceful way that we better start taking that approach to everything we do locally to give more people opportunities.
But by the same token, they will fail. I've had a couple of tribal members that I put in the LLCs. Those are the toughest components to run at S&K Technologies, to run an LLC. And really bright, aggressive, good people just couldn't cut it. I mean, so you just take that and realize, well, those two just weren't right for that particular job, and maybe they can do something else for somebody else. And so you just recognize, but you give them the opportunity. But you also want to measure it. You don't want to say, I think you're ready, when maybe in your heart you don't think they're ready. So.
And I just have, from a generalist point of view, because we have communications from our human resources department that come out to the tribal employee base, but the Oneida tribe is the third largest employer in its region, and 55% of them are Oneida. About 2,900 employees now, including the gaming side and the government side. So the other 45% makeup is of other natives and non-native people. But like I mentioned before, we do know that our personnel is our largest cost right now, and with the recession, we do have gaming operating we don't have as many travelers to our site, but we do have just as many, they're just not spending as much. So it's leveling off, and we are addressing continuing, they call it insanity, because we have budget development. We try to do 3-year projections, and it's extremely difficult with these constraints. And but we were moving forward with it, and a lot of Oneidas are fortunate to be working and living on our reservation.
Well, we're going to wrap up, and let me thank all of you for an awfully interesting discussion. The experiences you have had and will have are really teaching everybody great lessons. So thank you all very, very much. Ian,